Today's episode is sponsored by NextLink Labs, helping companies achieve lasting success with best-in-class technology. Visit them at nextlinklabs.com.
Aerospace and defense manufacturing.
Machines and automation.
Additive manufacturing.
Smart manufacturing.
The global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing.
Hello, and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. I'm your host, Steve Plum, Editor-in-Chief for SME Media. I'm joined today by Jeremy Dodson, Chief Information Security Officer, and Jay Corpy, Principal Cybersecurity Specialist, both of NextLink Labs, which specializes in digital solutions and cybersecurity. Welcome to the program, guys.
Thanks for having us.
So cybersecurity is always a interesting and exciting, fast-changing topic. Before we jump into it, can you both tell me how you got involved in the industry and a little bit about NextLink?
So my name is Jeremy. I am the CISO here at NextLink Labs. I started my career at NSA, where we were on we called at least the pointy tip of the spear digitally. And I spent my career over the past 20-something years both attacking and then eventually attacking our own infrastructure in the United States for Department of Energy and such to protect or do what we refer to as adversarial emulation. I've since taken all of that work and started doing things like helping to build organizations' cybersecurity programs, and also explain sort of the threats that are happening around us. Because I was in the Department of Energy, spent a lot of time around operational technology, which, as those that know, there's a big difference between IT and OT. And while we're in the middle of a convergence, or in my opinion, past that convergence, there's still a huge need for understanding the differences and how the two should be communicating. And so I have a sort of a unique perspective on that entire process, just because of how long I've been doing these things. So NextLink Labs, we're a leading cybersecurity and technology consulting firm. We also do app development and DevSecOps, so cloud computing and the like. We do comprehensive security solutions for various industries. As of the past probably 4 years, we've had a very strong focus in manufacturing and robotics. We help organizations protect their, like I was talking about earlier, their IT and their OT infrastructures. We do this by identifying vulnerabilities. We work through robust incident response plans. It's very important to know how to respond if something happens within your organization. And then we leverage different technologies, either cloud and or in the application, doing things like SCA and scanning code and really good secure software development lifecycle practices. And then we usually will do things like help organizations identify risk within their space itself. And by doing that, it allows us to really work with them for bespoke solutions on how to pivot once something does happen within their organization. And so, in essence, we are really dedicated to fostering a culture of cybersecurity. We like to build what's called cybersecurity champions within organizations to make sure that after we maybe leave consulting them, their personnel are still doing the things and talking about the things they need to maintain that level of protection that we help them build during our process, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, you brought up a lot of good points and starter questions for me. If we could just kind of base that where we are today as an industry, and you mentioned the convergence of IT and OT. What does that mean in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I talk about this a lot and have for a number of years now. I would say about 4 years ago, so around COVID, we had the first argument that I used to say about a decade ago, which is eventually you can't tell me that your OT environment is protected because it's not connected to the internet. And even as early as a decade ago, people would look at me that were running OT environments and say it's never going to happen. We're never going to connect these systems to the internet. They weren't designed to be connected to the internet, so why would we do it? Well, fast forward, COVID comes around, and all of a sudden, we're not able to get the experts that are needed to work on these systems. We're not able to fly them in to fix them. And so the solution becomes, well, let's just take this wireless access point just temporarily, and we're going to go ahead and connect it to this warehouse or to this manufacturing plant, and allow these experts in a remote location to come in and start taking a look. But it's not a big deal because we're just going to do it for a little while. Well, you had a lot of problems happening, right? You had VPN connections into environments that never have been or shouldn't have been, or that were done incorrectly in the case of like Colonial Pipeline. You had just all of these scenarios where we had the not older Purdue model. Everyone always gives me a hard time about giving the Purdue model a bad name, and I don't mean to do that. What I more mean is the traditional Purdue model was that we had IT infrastructure, and then we had this huge DMZ, and then we had OT environment, and the OT environment and the IT environment would never mix, and furthermore, the OT environment would never go to the internet. Well, when that started breaking down in practice, we started seeing a lot of problems come up because we had individuals that needed to try and gain control of it. The IT environment would come and try and do what they knew how to do in their space, and it just didn't work in the OT environment. Data wasn't necessarily king at the time, and they definitely did not understand safety, and that was and is probably the biggest concern for OT environments. But yeah, the reason I say now that it's not a problem is because, in my opinion, a lot of those things have been worked through, and now it's just correctly doing it from this point forward.
And does that apply across the board, or is it mainly the larger companies that understand and have effectively implemented a strategy?
That's a fantastic question. What I believe is the case is that, yes, the larger companies have started that process, but what happened just like in OT a while back when we started learning things about firewalls and we started understanding, protecting, and segmenting networks and doing all of the things that we do in an IT environment, and now how we're doing zero trust network architecture, the idea became we had to have an understanding of a model that made sense, and we had to put it into practice. So while the larger organizations are starting to do it now, it sort of paves the way for the smaller organizations that maybe didn't have the ability to try out things and test things, right? So now it's how do we apply the knowledge that we all know as an organization, not as an organization, but as an industry? How do we take that knowledge and apply it to everyone? How do we make sure that the smallest shop is doing the right things to protect what they're controlling, because they are part of a supply chain that is very, very important. And so, to your point, we're starting to see those in larger organizations, and the key now is how do we make sure everyone is doing those things?
The cybersecurity has been in the news a lot for many years now. A lot of the times you'll hear about banking breaches or customer personal information. But from a manufacturing standpoint, it's also been newsworthy with some big attacks on companies, some well-known companies, and sometimes you just don't hear about it at all. What are some of the unique challenges from a manufacturing standpoint in terms of cybersecurity?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a fantastic question as well. What we're dealing with right now sort of goes back to your last question, which is a lot of organizations have a lack of understanding of the what we're calling, Industry 4.0. The idea that we have these connected environments. I actually pulled some statistics from some of our partners that do this research, and one of it dealt exactly with what you're talking about. So across all industries, on average, you have account compromises around 18 to 27% of of all organizations are having some sort of problems within the cloud, as opposed to in the manufacturing environment, it's 43% of compromises are happening in the cloud. It's just a huge, not disconnect. It's just, that's a lot more than it needs to be. And it's a lack of understanding that technology, right? And then you also have just the impact to the industry is a lot different as well. If you take that same problem and do it to an organization that's selling software, there isn't going to be a huge impact. And a lot of times, therefore, they don't even report, even though they should be reporting a lot of the things that are happening. But in manufacturing, you can't really hide it. If you're down for a day, it's an insane amount of problems. In large organizations, some of the numbers that are quoted just this month were the fact that there are about $4.2 million on average per hour is what these breaches and downtime, unplanned downtime, is costing manufacturers. And these are obviously the larger organizations, but this all trickles down. That is not a small number to be playing with. And it, again, just boils down to needing to understand what risk they're accepting and needing to understand how to utilize the industry knowledge that we have now to help mitigate that risk.
So what are some of the most common breaches that you see?
So we had a long time ago, actually, individuals like Jay and still very much like Jay, social engineering attacks, being able to call someone or talk their way into a environment, either be it the warehouse itself and cause problems within the organization, either with what we would call leave behinds. That's how we did a lot of our attacks when we were with Department of Energy, as well as different municipalities that we would do cybersecurity for. And it boils down to, once you get an individual, a trusted individual, into an organization to gather data, it's very, very hard to protect against that. But it then started swinging in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, it's actually we've seen an uptick in misconfiguration of environments, and that misconfiguration has caused more problems than social engineering. And then you pair the two together, and it's even worse. And you have things like, not necessarily manufacturing, but a really good example of this is the casinos, where they had misconfiguration of systems on top of a social engineering attack that attackers could leverage. This happens quite a lot in manufacturing as well. But we're not usually in the business of naming names. So,
and what do you mean by misconfiguration of environments?
Yeah, so this could be misconfiguring the cloud for environment. For example, one of the reasons why we see such a larger uptick in compromises, it could be not properly setting up VPNs. It could be having VPNs as opposed to software-defined perimeters. So not practicing things like zero trust network architecture. Not working through microsegmentation. All too often we have things, and these are a lot of buzzwords, but a lot of tech jargon. So you have things like flat networks. We see all too often. What this means is, if I'm in a warehouse and I connect into any one of the systems there, be it an OT environment or otherwise, now, unfortunately, I shouldn't have access to, HR's computer system. That would be what's considered a flat network. There's no segmentation between systems. And that is a huge misconfiguration. And so that allows me to not even sometimes break into the warehouse to start affecting manufacturing. I may just have to sit in a conference room and plug into an empty port, and then I can affect any system within that organization because I'm not being segmented off. That's a misconfiguration, what I speak of.
Yeah, Jay, on the social engineering side, how does that tie into, both on its own, but when in conjunction with a misconfiguration?
So from the social engineering side, a lot of the fun things that I get to play around with are some of the legacy systems that companies have. They've got systems that they're just not designed to have cybersecurity in mind. And so I get to go and I get to go and take advantage of the human element by talking my way into an area or sending some emails and getting folks to click things that they're not supposed to click. But from the physical aspect of getting into an area that I'm not supposed to be, after I've talked my way in there and I become, as Jeremy was saying earlier, a trusted person in that environment, people are used to seeing me there. People, get to know me a little bit, and they feel that I'm a part of that organization in some way. That's kind of, that is one of the ways that we get some information from folks about how their networks are configured, what they're doing to protect themselves. So we can get the information from the IT staff and from non-IT staff of what their training standards are like. We can talk about, some of the gaps. We can figure out when they do their updates and those types of things. So we can try to take advantage a little bit of that. So it's very being careful of the information that you're relaying to people. And to be quite frank, a lot of times I don't even have to go and talk to people. I don't have to go into environments. A lot of folks are putting this stuff out on social media. So we're able to take advantage of information folks are putting out on their own social media profiles, the company profiles. Hey, as a company, we're now using this as a protection, against whatever. And so then we get to, go and research some of that and utilize that. And so it's just a lot of scraping. So a lot of this really comes down to OPSEC. And OPSEC is operational security. So just protecting your security, your day-to-day operations, what you're doing, how you're going about your typical daily work life, not putting your passwords out there, not putting your badges out there. So from a social engineering standpoint, that's another big thing that I get to do is take pictures of badges. A lot of folks, it's a very exciting time when you get hired at a new company. And you get hired, you take that picture of your badge, and you put it online, and you say, look, I just got this new job at this really large manufacturing company. I'm very excited. Here it is. It's proof that I'm now a part of this. And so you can now take that badge, and you can create, a fake badge that looks very, very, very similar to that. And if it's something, there's different ways that you can go about it. I can go and hang out with the group there that's having lunch. If I have the same badge, maybe they'll just let me walk in the door behind them, so I never even have to badge in. If it's somewhere where I do have to badge in, perhaps I can claim to have issues with my badge, and security will just let me pass because it looks the same. So there's many things. Again, it all comes down to OPSEC. Make sure that you're protecting the sensitive information that your company has, your strategies that you're doing. It's great to have that strategy. It's great to know that strategy, but that needs to stay within your company.
So it sounds like it's kind of the old long con where they can set it up over time and really plot out how they're going to attack.
It is. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of figuring out. And that's one of the things that a lot of folks don't realize is they'll hear a company has been, they've been breached and something's happened. A lot of folks don't realize that breach actually happened on average 7 months ago. Somebody was in there and they've just been sitting, and whether it's in the system or whether it's through social engineering, somebody has been observing and researching that company in a lot more detail and has actually breached that company on average 7 months prior to the breach being identified and being released.
So we talked about some of the concerns and problem areas. How should companies go about identifying potential vulnerabilities, and more importantly, what's the first step once they identify it to protect against them?
Oh man, that's a wonderful question. Yeah, definitely identifying those types of things are huge, and so not just manufacturers, all companies, but manufacturers can definitely identify the vulnerabilities using comprehensive risk assessments. Like a preliminary risk evaluation type situation where you come in, you evaluate the risks that you have, and then you decide, is that a risk that we're willing to take, or is that a risk that we need to mitigate? And Jeremy is one of these one of the folks he's huge on it's okay to accept risk. You just have to know that you're accepting it, and you have to know why you're accepting it and be able to explain it. And risk can mean, a myriad of different things, and I'll let Jeremy get into that here shortly, but being able to do that, identifying what it is up front, and then at that point, figuring out how to mitigate the ones that you're not willing to accept, the risks that you're not willing to accept, and then being able to explain why you are accepting the other risk and monitoring that risk and making sure that that's not putting you in a bad position.
Yeah, so Jay, I think you did a great job with like identifying and what to do after, so answering the question, but I wanted to take it a step further, and not only on the monitoring side of things, but on what to do, like how to handle it. So incident response becomes so important. When you have the companies that have a plan for what to do when they accept risk versus the companies that don't have a plan on what to do and accept that same risk is a huge difference. And we learned that recently with CrowdStrike, right? When that incident happened, the organizations that were able to look at that and say, hey, we have critical systems that went down. The way we deal with critical systems going down is that we work through these steps to bring those critical systems back up, and let's do that. And they go through their process, and those systems come back up. They make adjustments. They roll back. Whatever they need to do, whatever their process is, they're up and running, no big deal. Maybe a day goes by. Maybe a few hours went by for great organizations. A day went by for a lot of other really great organizations. If there was more than a week and you were dealing with that, the fallout from that, it's either it was a personnel issue, you didn't have enough people, or you didn't really have an incident response or a plan on how to mitigate or work through that problem set. And that is that next step. So everything that Jay was just talking about, and then actually having something planned that you can test and put in place makes a lot of these things not that big of a deal. Like ransomware is a huge deal, but in reality, to solve it and to fight it is not that hard.
So how detailed should these plans be? And can you give some examples of how to counter or respond to ransomware?
Yeah, definitely. So as far as how detailed, so the way we work through these problem sets with organizations is understanding the business impact that matters. So if you feel, for example, you could look at a number of systems on an operating floor or operations floor, or number of systems that you consider critical to your business, and you look at those systems and say, okay, if those were gone for a day, this would be bad for us. We would lose millions of dollars or something. We'd lose trust. In my opinion, then taking the time to build a detailed plan where you could take those systems down purposefully and bring them back up in a meaningful amount of time, the time that you accept as uptime, should be happening and being tested minimum at a quarterly basis if these things are going to be dropping millions of dollars for you if they're down. However, if you look at those same systems and you feel that they aren't as impactful or there wouldn't be much damage, then that allows you to not have to put as much time and effort into that plan. And that plan could simply just be, for example, I'll talk to your ransomware attacks. I always will say this, a company that has clean backups, and what I mean by clean backups are you can scan your backups to make sure that you aren't compromised still. Jay made a great point. A lot of times what we see is 7 months ago, you had your systems compromised. The attackers sit dormant. They attack you on a weekend. And what happens is everyone rolls back a week to their backups. Well, what that means is you just rolled back your backups and you were still compromised because your systems have been compromised for months. So being able to have a backup and scan for compromise and know that your backups are clean is an extremely good way to mitigate the fallout of ransomware attacks. You have a ransomware attack, you restore a clean backup, and you're back up and running as long as in whatever time that takes you to get those backups restored. And by testing that, by knowing that you can restore those critical systems is the next key. So a clean backup and knowing the process and know that you've tested it. All too often, we have people say that they back up every day and they're clean, but they've never tested once. And when push comes to shove, they restore, they can't get it to work. Those clean backups that you did every single day are worthless.
I mean, so you should do this at least on a quarterly basis?
Well, so again, there's no hard or fast rules. The way we talk about it, and Jay talked about this as well, the way we like to describe it is you've got to understand what you're willing to accept. Accepting risk is an acceptable thing, right? You have something called a risk appetite. That we throw around those words, and this means that you could be a risk averse, that you want no risk, or a risk seeking company. If you're an innovative company that needs to be on the edge of technology, sometimes you're going to be, the first to cloud, the first using AI in an environment, the first to whatever that may be, that you're going to have to accept some amount of risk. But now, if that risk that you're accepting could impact your company monetarily and or reputationally or whatever, you then have to put an equal amount of effort in the mitigation and preparation of that technology or of that decision. So if you're willing to accept a lot of risk, you have to be willing to put in a lot of work to not only be on the forefront of that technology, but to ensure stakeholders and or your process that if the system goes down, you're able to come back up in a reasonable amount of time, in an acceptable amount of time. That acceptable amount of time is up to those individuals, right? And so I typically, if it were me and a lot of the organizations that I work with, a quarterly basis is an absolute minimum. But the compliance would tell most organizations at least every year. Get a pen test every year. But organizations that are more cybersecurity are more aware of cybersecurity threats or cyber threats that are out there are going to maybe do it every quarter. And there are some that have continuous scanning. So it all depends on what you want to do and how those systems could impact you if they have problems.
And how comprehensive should it be throughout the company? Who should be involved? How often should employees be trained on cybersecurity? What does that training look like?
Okay, that's awesome. So I was going to interrupt Jay when he talked because I heard his hesitation there when he was talking about the social engineering, and it's because we feel like when we do attacks, I always have to preface, I'm a good guy. I'm attacking you for good reasons. I want to protect you. It's the same thing when Jay does a social engineer. His job is to break into buildings and or get into organizations or to get people when they're paying us to do it to talk about their systems. And they don't know that they're giving up information they shouldn't be giving up. And so it's things like this. There's a lot of people that don't even realize that we can take a picture of their badge, not only recreate the badge, but then walk up to their scanner and understand what we need to send in order for that fake badge that we made to actually work, and or how to walk up to somebody and clone their badge and then make our fake badge actually work with that environment. Just the fact that people learn that, it's awesome to see the way they change their stuff or their every day. They stop hanging their badge on their rearview mirror. They stop, wearing their badge around their neck when they're out and about getting lunch. People always will talk to me about, would you trust a company that's been breached, or would you trust a company that's had a cyber attack? And my answer usually is, I would trust them more if they take the proper steps, because that organization knows what it feels like to be attacked, and believe me, they do not want it to happen again. It's the organizations that feel it won't happen to them because they don't understand what all of these attacks and these emerging threats are that I'm more leery of. And so to answer your question about the training, making your organization aware of the threats that most likely happen in that industry. So tailgating, everybody should be badging in and out. Everybody should, if you don't recognize someone, challenge them. If you don't understand someone, someone on a phone call is calling you and it doesn't feel right, validate them. If you have to hang up with them, and go call someone else and have someone else take it. Like, all of these steps are things that people should be trained on, because protecting an organization against these attacks is usually very simple, but people just don't know how to do it. And this is one of the things we talked about, is creating cybersecurity champions, people that ask the questions that need to be asked, even if they don't understand cybersecurity. Having those individuals in your organization do amazing things to protect it.
So hands-on training, going above and beyond just having a monthly or quarterly video that people watch and answer a few questions, but really to see what the effect could be and how it happens in real time, in real life.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest, when you're asking your question about who should be involved in the training, it shouldn't be just leadership. It shouldn't just be management. It shouldn't be just employees. It should be the entire organization. And that goes from janitorial staff all the way up to the C-suite. So everybody needs to know, because a lot of times, especially, and this is one of the things that we would do when we are hired to investigate a company, if you will, is at nighttime. We'll go in off hours. We'll go on weekends. A lot of times, the only folks that are there are the janitorial staff. And if they don't understand and they don't know what the cybersecurity risks are, being from a social engineering standpoint, if I just knock on the door and say, hey, I left my badge on my desk up there on the 5th floor, perhaps they just open the door and let me in. And it needs to be those things where they're comfortable enough. So a lot of it comes down to empowering staff also, to where they're comfortable enough and feel empowered enough to be able to say, sorry, the policy is this, and you know that policy. If you really work here, I can't let you in. We'll see you Monday. And then you can talk with the HR team, or you can talk with the badging team, or whoever it is. But there's nothing I can do for you now. And so just giving them that ability and that empowerment is going to go a long, long way. Again, the entire organization, not just certain people, not just certain departments. And it doesn't all fall on the cybersecurity team. It doesn't all fall on the IT team. It really needs to be the entirety of that company. And when it comes to the training, a lot of things that we have found, at least from the things that I've seen, is making it fun. Like when you watch that slideshow, that you can click through, and it's an hour-long slideshow that you get done in 4.5 minutes because I took it last year. It's the exact same one. Click, click, click. I don't even remember what it was, but I've checked the box. That's not effective training.
I was bored just hearing you say that.
Right? I know. I heard you snoring. And then you have the videos that people watch. I remember this from other organizations I worked at. You'll watch the video that you can either fast forward through, or you can press play, walk up, and go away. It needs to be something that's interactive. A gamification we've seen is quite good, and then being able to a lot of the most successful companies when it comes to training, they reward the employees for completing the training, and they reward their employees for identifying when they've made a mistake. That is huge. So if I now come to you and say, hey, Steve, I clicked on a link in an email, I don't think it was right. And you say, congratulations, thank you so much for identifying that. We'll look into it. Instead of berating me and chastising me and telling me how horrible the job I just did and I should know better because I've taken training for the last 7 years at this company, you say, hey, great job, thanks for identifying it. Let's figure this out together. And you bring me on board with this and trying to solve this. That's going to do a lot more for the company and than any training will. And then we've also seen where folks will give gift cards for identifying when they've made a mistake, or the first person to get through the training with 100% on the questions, that type of thing. You get a gift card. And so those are some things, rewarding, gamification of training, and making sure that everybody's on board.
What types of gamifications have you found that have been effective? There
are some video gamifications. So it's going to be like almost like a video game that you'll play, and it comes through, identify the risks, spot the potential vulnerability, take a look at who the shady character is, and those kinds of things. So it's like a video game that you have to navigate through, and you get points for correct answers, and you get 3 lives, and so on and so forth. And so those are fun ones. They can be very interactive, very exciting when it comes to the gamification. But then there's also the real world gamification, where you do hire other companies like us, and we'll come in and we'll try to get into the environment. And I know it doesn't really sound like gamification, but if somebody is identifying that risk and saying, hey, this guy doesn't belong here, or this person doesn't belong here, let's challenge them, and they're empowered enough to challenge them, and I say, hey, congratulations, you did this is one of the things that I was trying to do, is get in, and you stopped it, you identified it, I'm going to notify your manager or whoever it is, and then the manager rewards them with, again, a gift card or something for doing the right thing. That's a form of gamification as well. So you have the live gamification, then you have the video game style gamification.
Yeah, I think besides gamification, entertaining, I think is the key. Like a story that people want to come back to. There are a number of companies out there that do a great job with telling an entertaining story in their training videos. One of my favorites is Social Proof Security. They do a great job and put a lot of time and effort into making sure people are entertained while watching this data, because it is all very boring sometimes. But the idea becomes, when you can make someone even question something that feels off because they know something, the number one thing I've seen is, in the most awkward way, is rewarding people, and or even identifying people, during, I've seen people that have like newsletters that go out, and they're like, so-and-so identified number of things, thank you for doing that. You got a lunch on us, whatever. Those things, when I first saw them pop up over a decade ago, I thought they were weird. There was one actually had a name for it. It was like Star Program or something. But the amount of data, like when we went there and attacked that organization, the amount of data that they got that was actually really good was insane. Like we were found on a lot of our low-hanging fruit attacks almost immediately by that organization's staff that weren't IT staff. And it was very obvious that it was because of that program where it wasn't being, those groups weren't being chastised for speaking up. They were being thanked, and there was gratitude shown towards empowering them, as Jay said. So,
right, we've covered a lot of potential risks, and obviously as you become more connected, that continues to increase. And we also talked about some of the best practices and training to prevent these and mitigate them. But of course, it's a moving target, constantly updating and looking for new tactics to get into an organization. How can companies stay ahead of the game and look at what's next and future trends in cybersecurity?
I mean, really, it's just being in tune with what's happening, just what's happening in the world. So to be able to future-proof yourself, well, I don't want to say future-proof because you can't future-proof, but able to adapt to future trends, a lot of times you just need to be aware of some of the increased risk that comes with some of the IoT devices. And Jeremy talked about this earlier, a lot of things that are going on the network that never were able to. A lot of times now they're coming with default security standards, and being able to understand that you can change those if need be. And so just learning what's happening in the environment, staying in tune with what's going on in the news. And then, I mean, we've got, a lot of folks right now, that's one of the biggest ways to sell your product is to say, hey, my product has AI in it. And immediately people go, well, I want it. And so just being aware of, with the rise of all the AI stuff and products and SaaS things and devices, everything now has AI in it. Being aware of AI-driven attacks and other things that you can do to identify and mitigate those risks that are out there as well.
Yeah, and for me, right now you'll have people talk about, industrial Internet of Things as being introducing new vulnerabilities. Like we've had these devices for years, but they are being more widely used. And then, like Jay said, adding AI into the mix further complicates those things because people don't quite understand like how that data needs to be protected. So with machine learning, we'll just call it, I guess, what it is in this particular case, we're feeding all of our data into this environment that we then don't know how to protect. Well, I guess we do, but the organizations don't know how to protect that we work with. And the idea becomes when you start introducing things like quote unquote AI-driven things, you have a ton of your IP, intellectual property data that you're pumping into a system that if you don't control that, it is going everywhere. What was it, like 2 years ago, Samsung, all of their coders were writing code and using ChatGPT, and then there was a leak of data, and it ended up being all their IP, intellectual property code, was out there and being utilized by other individuals. You had Copilot doing the same thing, where people's were getting code suggestions as they were building applications, and it was other companies' intellectual property was getting leaked out. Like, not understanding where your data goes is a huge problem. So focusing on data protection strategies is always going to be like the most important. It's going to be evergreen, right? You're never going to hear someone say, oh, don't focus on encryption or securing your storage or looking at data in motion, data at rest, data in transit. That's a thing of the past. That's always going to be the case. And then understanding compliance and how things are changing. Like right now, things are changing so quickly, especially around AI, that we're still writing, like the ink hasn't even dried on some of the regulations that are being put in place. And we have companies and organizations that don't know the regulations that have been out there for years, sometimes decades, let alone the ones that are being written this month. So being able to understand and or work with organizations that understand those regulations could be the difference between $1,500 per an incident within your environment due to compliance penalties, or $1.5 million per incident because of gross negligence of those same things. And it just becomes very important to understand the risk that you're accepting and then how to take all of that and start protecting yourselves with it.
Yeah, and to go along with that, a lot of manufacturing companies, they bring in third-party organizations to help with a myriad of things, and just doing their due diligence with that third party before completely implementing their services, figuring out if they're compliant with things, how they're doing their compliance, why they're doing their compliance, to mitigate the risks that you're accepting from that third party.
And how extensive should the due diligence be in terms of cybersecurity with third-party partners?
Oh, it's in my opinion, they're an extension of your organization, right? A lot of times what we'll see, in fact, so one of the specialties that I've had in my past is supply chain interdiction, which is the idea of I may not be attacked. In fact, Jay specializes in this. He mentioned a few times janitorial services. There was one of the talks that he gave not too long ago. He at the beginning of the day was a janitor at an organization, and at the end of the day, he was a CEO of a fake organization in order to break into a building. And it was all because we understood the third parties that were involved in that organization, and we were attacking that third party because they had weak security. The company we were attacking didn't have weak security, but they had trust in their third party. And so by understanding your third party's security standards, what they understand, how they protect the data that you entrust them with, is more important, in my opinion, than how you handle your data, because you can accept risk and you can explain away your problems and work through your problems as an organization, but you can't do that for a third party. So from the very beginning, you need to understand what their stance is, and you need to be able to dictate, not necessarily dictate, but you need to be able to articulate what your expectations of them are. Hey, you're going to have access to sensitive data. You're going to have access to sensitive locations on our warehouse. We need to know that we can trust you, and we need to know that if someone knocks on a door, yeah, you don't work for this company, but you represent this company when you're here, doing your job. And we need to know that if someone comes up to the door and knocks on it, that you're not going to let them in just because they tell you they work here. Like, that's educating them also. And that relationship needs to be allowed to say, hey, we expect that your staff, a third party that we're hiring, that your staff go adhere to these guidelines and adhere to these security standards. Otherwise, we're going to have to find someone else.
Yeah, especially in a manufacturing environment where there's so many suppliers, customers making deliveries and interacting with your data, whether it's product development or just sharing information. All right. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time. Very informative, a little bit scary, but it's good to know that that there are some white hats out there constantly looking for new ways to protect against new threats. We appreciate you taking the time. And if listeners want to learn more about NextLink, where should they go?
You can find us at nextlinklabs.com. That's a great place to go. You can reach out to us on our social media. So, for example, on LinkedIn, you can find us at NextLink Labs. You can take a look at my LinkedIn and Jeremy's LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thanks again. And to learn more about the latest manufacturing trends and hear more of our podcast, visit advancedmanufacturing.org.